If you need high quality over-the-counter supplements, check out tigerfitness.com, MTS Nutrition, coupon code ALEX10. If you need any carnitine peptides or anything like that, go over to real-peptides.com and use code ALEX10. What's going on, everyone? Online Prep Coach Ask here with prepcoach.com, here with the complete guide to growth hormone dosing frequency. So this is a very popular question, and it kind of is spurred from the fact of a lot of people asking, why not microdose growth hormone all throughout the day at every meal? It's something that people have been doing for decades. It's something I used to do with clients and myself until you realize, why aren't the results happening like they should be? So whenever you don't see things actually happen in real world application, then you kind of have to go back to your education and figure out what's really going wrong to explain why this isn't working. And that's kind of what I did with this. So the picture associated with this, I'm not sure if I'm going to put this out as a podcast or on Instagram. It'll probably be everywhere, knowing me. You'll see I wrote them on the board, and it is GH, so growth hormone circadian biology. And it really starts off here in understanding. So we kind of have to go through a couple things first and foremost before we go any further. So as you can see, number one, we have that male and female differences. So from a gender aspect, somatic activity is completely different. In the male side of things, we have less frequent, bigger boluses of growth hormone releases. And on the female side of things, we have more frequent, but lower total number of growth hormone boluses. So what I mean by that is if you look at the male pattern, it's more of a spiky, huge spike up, come back down, huge spike up, come back down. Whereas the female is kind of that sine wave of, we're up, we're down, up, we're down, up, we're down, up, we're down. So a female kind of has a continuous growth hormone releasing pattern, whereas males are more of the infrequent bolus type thing. So if we look at number two, this has to have a little bit of explanation. So we are looking at kilodaltons. So whenever we look at kilodaltons, these are the main isoforms that make up growth hormone. So we say growth hormone, there's all these multiple different isoforms, subfractions, oligomers, heterodimers, homodimers, all these things that no one ever talks about. So if you look at your exogenous growth hormone product, that is what's known as a 22 kilodalton growth hormone. That is the main one in circulation. And then we go to its kind of complementary counterpart, which is the 20 kilodalton isoform. So if you look again in the literature, you'll see something like a common statement that is 22 kilodalton growth hormone is the predominant isoform in circulation, and the 20 kilodalton isoform makes up the other 5 to 10%. Now, in reality, and like everything in biology, nothing operates on its own. And although the statement that, the 22 kilodalton isoform is the main one in circulation, it's tough because you really can't do anything without the accompaniment of downstream 20 kilodalton. What I mean by that is without 20 kilodalton, other somatic oligomers, heterodimers, homodimers, nothing else is going to happen with that 22 variation. So what I mean by that, and if we kind of scroll back and understand what's really going on here and look at the actual percentages, we're looking at kind of something like a 76-ish% of total circulating growth hormone bringing up the 22 kilodalton variety, about 10% being the 20 kilodalton variety, and about 14% being the oligomer, homodimers, heterodimers, all the extra stuff. And in reality, even that is wrong because these actual numbers come up and come down based on the time of day, based on the environmental stressor and the other environmental ligands in place. So it's very important to understand that first and foremost, because if you don't understand it, then we can't really move forward in this conversation. So with that in mind, understand a bunch of different kinds of growth hormone, again, subfractions, isoforms, all these different things going on that make the entire system work as a whole. If we move down into the next thing, and actually let's come back up to that number two position really quickly. We have 22, 20, 17.5, and 5. You see stop, help, and then plus others. The plus others are the oligomers, homodimers, and heterodimers that are always in place. The 22 seems to always be paired with a 20, and the 17.5 seems to always be paired with a 5. So we're looking at these kilodaltons as 22 basically doing everything in all of the main action, 20 complementing and making up the differences in the areas that 22 kilodalton lacks. So whatever 22 can't do, 20 does, and it kind of molds together very well. In the same way, if we look at 17.5 and that 5 pairing, 17.5 is that one to kind of send the real stop signal, not somatostatin, and 5 is the one to actually help and further potentiate the insulogenic effects and actually a lot of the other effects of 22 and 20 kilodalton growth hormones. So we have that 5 kind of, if you could loop that circle back around and arrow back up to 22 and 20, it's going to actually cause those to potentiate and work better. Whereas 17.5 goes all the way to the end and actually sends the real stop signal. If we understand somatostatin, understand all its different various isoforms and the receptors and what's actually going on there from an SSTRI 1, 2A, B, 3, 4, and 5 aspect, we're starting to realize that if we look at somatostatin, so produced in neuroendocrine neurons of the actual ventromedial nucleus of the hypothalamus, so that's going to project to the median eminence. Somatostatin is released from the nerve endings into the hypothalamal hypophyseal system that's carried to the anterior pituitary gland and ultimately inhibits the secretion of growth hormone from somatotroph cells. So the somatostatin neurons in the paraventricular nucleus mediate negative feedback effects of growth hormone via responding to high circulating concentrations of growth hormone. Now the problem here is the half-life of somatostatin is around, 2 to 3 minutes, and its diurnal pattern really varies from person to person given the responsive nature of somatostatin. On top of that, we have different interactions with the suprachiasmatic nucleus, actual SCN, so suprachiasmatic nucleus, BMAL1, PER1, clock, and all these different things. And if we can look back up to what's actually happening with exogenous growth hormone administration, because this is what changes from endogenous to exogenous usage. So naturally producing growth hormone versus taking it from a bottle. When we actually chronically apply exogenous growth hormone, there's an increased expression of that clock gene and a decreased expression of that PER1 gene, making growth hormone kind of a median for the suprachiasmatic nucleus to regulate peripheral clock systems and actually acts as an endocrine factor to transmit signals from the suprachiasmatic nucleus to peripheral tissues. So hear that again. Growth hormone is literally acting as a median for the suprachiasmatic nucleus to regulate peripheral clocks. So we have the suprachiasmatic nucleus up here in the brain. Can't really see, but I'm pointing up there with my finger. And growth hormone is being the median to control everything else downstream in the body. So if we can understand that, we kind of start realizing, wow, does somatostatin really even matter? And does it really even matter whenever we're taking exogenous growth hormone? That's where you kind of find out, oh, it doesn't. It's really the 17.5 that's keeping us from being this acromegaly-based giant and just growing ginormous foreheads. So I know that's a lot to take in. You're probably going to have to hear this a couple times because this is pretty dense research, but let's leave that there. Let's scroll down to that bottom number 3. This is a very brief overview of what's going on in AM and PM settings. So in the AM, we're looking at the overall environmental ligands that are going to be there, and the overall environment as a whole, actually. So in the morning, we wake up, there's that initial release of cortisol, a release of catecholamines. We see heart rate going up, ventilation's initially going up, blood pressure's initially going up. We have all these things that are causing an alarm response. So in the morning, it's, hey, it's wake up, it's liberate, it's go, let's actually start things moving. What does that sound like? That kind of sounds like fat loss, right? Let's go, let's liberate, let's move. That's literally a fat loss-based scenario, aka why we say if you want to lose fat with taking growth hormone, take it in the AM. In the PM, when it's paired with the melatonins, the thyroid, the actual photonic exchange from the actual moon, a lower heart rate, a lower ventilation-based scenario, with all those things that are happening from a suprachiasmatic nucleus and circadian biology side of things, even with, if we look at that diurnal patterns of sodium, potassium, ATPase pumps and what's going on there, we're really looking at a recovery-based scenario. Once again, aka why we actually say take growth hormone in the PM before bed and get the maximum amount of growth. And that's not only just from a muscle tissue actin myosin aspect, that's from a neurological recovery aspect, that's from a soft tissue articular cartilage aspect. Go down the list, that actual growth hormone JAK-STAT pathway is going to be driven so much harder and so much more specific for growth factor purposes in the PM setting. So we understand that. Let's scroll over, cross that little squiggly line on the picture associated with this podcast, post, whatever the hell it's going to be. And now we have up top, it says exogenous growth hormone. This is very important to talk about. I said before that the 22 kilodalton growth hormone variety is the one that everyone's buying in their bottles, every athlete's using. In reality, there are 20 kilodalton products, aka used together in conjunction with 22 kilodalton products to skirt any growth hormone isoform testing in elite level sports. More on that later, potentially. We have 5 kilodalton products, which have been manufactured actually quite extensively. I'm not sure why no one ever talks about that. And then we have other things like 45 kilodalton products, which actually act for acromegaly-based patients to kind of sit there, occupy the growth hormone receptor, and kind of shut down that JAK-STAT signaling pathway in the first place to prevent any of that ribosomal activity to prevent actual growth. So if we are understanding that, we realize, okay, the whole wide world of growth hormone manufacturing is a lot more vast than I thought. That's cool. Let's put that in the back of our head. Let's go back to that 22 kilodalton variety because that's what we are really talking about, at least for the athletes and the bodybuilders and strongmen and powerlifters that I'm talking with. The other 20 kilodalton forms and the 5 kilodalton forms, those are we'll say more so for the elite of the elite. So I'm talking about athletes that are actually getting paid millions of dollars per year, whether we're talking about the Olympics or NFL, NHL, all of those things. That's where those things kinds of live, because that's where the real money is. Money is really not in bodybuilding or strongman or powerlifting. It's in these other more, we'll say, mainstream athletics. So we continue down that 22 kilodalton variety. We see, and this is a big part to understand, because everyone says you take exogenous growth hormone and your natural growth hormone is suppressed for 24 hours or whatever people say. In reality, if you really understand the research and then understand what's going on, and keep in mind, there's a lot of research here from acromegaly-based patients, growth hormone deficient-based patients, and then also not so much in the athletic world, but more general population usage with general understanding of these drug kinetics and dynamics. We take that exogenous growth hormone product. What happens? We see a blunting, not a complete shutdown, but a blunting of that 20 kilodalton isoform. That's how that isoform test actually works for growth hormone testing. But 22 is the highest because obviously you just took it from a bottle. But what's going on in the background? While the 20 is being blunted. So we have high 22, blunted 20, but all the other oligomers, homodimers, and heterodimers always present. If they weren't present, your heart would stop working. Your brain would shut down. That somatic, thyroidal, insulinogenic, that entire axis plays off of things like our cardiac system, our renal system, our hepatic system. It cross-talks, cross-communicates, and causes us to actually function properly. So no matter what you were doing, if you took a growth hormone shot every hour on the hour, you would be extremely high 22, pretty blunted 20, but still all those other environmental growth hormone constituents there in place. So in reality, that blunting of the 20 and overall endogenous production is kind of anywhere from 1 to 3 hours. There's a cool amount of research out there, again, on growth hormone deficient patients that have been using growth hormone continuously, both the acutely applied products and the longer applied products that they are making these days, which are pretty freaking cool, where you take one growth hormone shot per month, again, subject for another day. But essentially, even within those individuals, they can stop taking the product. And in the worst case scenario, it is a full 24 hours, but that's more looking at the long-acting, I guess I'll say estrogen varieties, which it's not really that simple, but again, conversation for another day. But when you're taking traditional 22 kilodalton growth hormone with a normal lifespan, life cycle that happens, you're looking at that blunting happening about 1 to 3 hours. So if we understand that, then we see, okay, let's pair this at night. So we're about to go to bed. We take our exogenous 22 kilodalton growth hormone product. We see, the initial 22 high, blunting of 20, other oligomers, homodimers, and heterodimers present. 1 to 3 hours later, during that blunting process, we get another release, whether you're male or female, of another pairing of 22 and a 20 kilodalton product, or rather endogenous release. So we see endogenous release of 22 and 20. We see an additional pairing of 17.5 and 5, plus all the other oligomers, homodimers, and heterodimers, plus all the environmental ligands. So see how I have that arrow going over to the PM setting? All of that endogenous release is being paired with that. So if you go to bed at 8 p.m., then at 9 p.m., you're having another bolus release. Within the first, couple minutes of sleep, you're actually having a pretty big bolus release of growth hormone. Carry that over into the biggest endogenous release of growth hormone. That's being paired at 2 a.m. And that's also being paired with that increase in thyroids. So now you can understand, okay, from a growth hormone circadian biology aspect, it's the pairing that's happening with the environmental ligands that really matters. So it's really a 22, 20, 17.5, and 5 kilodalton growth hormone equation. Now, what you're probably thinking, why does taking growth hormone, microdosing at every meal, why is that wrong? Why is that bad? Why is that stupid? What ends up happening is you are completely bypassing the environmental ligand scenario, and you are creating this kind of screwed up milieu of internal ligands and processes that actually more so resembles acromegaly-based patients. And that's a big statement to make, because bodybuilders that are doing this aren't growing massive foreheads and things of that nature, purely because the somatic number would be way too high. They couldn't take enough growth hormone with every meal to get to that level. But what we're going to see is an accumulation of side effects because what's happening from an environmental aspect. So what we're really looking at is first thing upon waking, right before bed, or around a training scenario window being the best times to utilize growth hormone. So to answer the question from a dosage of frequency aspect side of things, we're looking at taking growth hormone at most about 2 boluses per day. If not, you're not pairing it with the right environmental ligands. We're not going to see the right endogenous cascade and release, and therefore we're not going to see the same ultimate effect. It's like the person who will try and take insulin, again, pre-workout, post-workout, before bed, first thing upon waking, all these things, people try and be so superhuman and so super physiological all times, they're missing the novelty. And this access needs novelty. If it doesn't have novelty, then these oligomers, homodimers, and heterodimers are getting set the wrong signal, paired with the wrong environmental ligands, and all of a sudden, you're starting to proliferate tissue you don't want to proliferate. So cardiac tissue, you're gonna start running into issues with your spinal cord, you're gonna start running into issues with things that you don't want. So if you end up taking growth hormone microdosed too frequently, you end up taking something that's supposed to be specific and make it very unspecific. Therefore, it's not going to be going to target tissue, it's going to be going to everything else that you don't want. So that is the best way long-term to accumulate side effects and to literally have problems. Growth hormone needs to be a very specifically used product because it's based on the environment it's introduced into, and it needs to be novelly used. The novelty wears off after 2 doses within a 24-hour period. And again, that's going back to not only my own interactions with athletes and just picking up on what happens over the years from real world experience and growth and less side effect accumulation, but also the growth hormone deficient research, which is extensive, and the acromegaly research, which is freaking extensive, and the burn patient research, which is absolutely extensive. So if you can combine all these things together, you start to realize that. Now, the final thing I want to end on, because I'm sure people will go down this rabbit hole of thinking is, okay, if you understand this, if you understand what I'm saying, then the follow-up would be, why does MK677 work so well? Because that just dumps bolus releases, the frequency goes up, and males turn into having like this kind of bisexual female growth hormone release where it's so frequent, but it's also so high. How do they respond so well from that? Disregarding the side effect accumulation, why does MK677 work so well? And that goes back to looking at it as a peptidomimetic-based structure and what it does downstream with enzymatic-based cascades. So I've made plenty of videos talking about MK677, and essentially what we're looking at there is as MK677 driving more of the downstream somatic enzymatic interactions and not everything else that growth hormone does. So growth hormone affects non-enzymatic, enzymatic, and every other kind of system and subsystem in between because of there's so many different dimers, multimers, and all the different oligomers and heterodimers and homodimers in place. So MK677 works completely differently on an endogenous level. We are talking about exogenous growth hormone administration being the exogenous hormone, therefore changing and acting as a median for the suprachiasmatic nucleus to regulate peripheral clock systems. And that actually causes, so from growth hormone compared to MK is not going to drive anything from an MUP aspect from the liver, whereas growth hormone will. We see BMAL1 actually itself directly enhancing growth hormone receptor integrity and improving the entire growth hormone receptor JAK-STAT pathway only in the exogenous growth hormone applied product, not in the enzymatically applied, aka MK677 based product. So your ultimate guide to wrap it up for growth hormone dosage frequency is looking at dosing at a maximum of 2 times per day. Other than that, you're just going to run into issues and you're pretty much going to be shooting yourself in the foot. So I hope that makes sense. This is a really in-depth topic. I hope you guys absolutely enjoyed this. Thank you so much for listening. Check out thepepcoach.com. See you next time.